Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are doing a 2023 Detroit Lions season breakdown and preview. We'll be going over their draft class, breaking down each position, ranking them inside the division, and finishing it off with a prediction of every game that they'll play this season. Let's go ahead and jump right into it, starting with their draft grades. Well, first off, big one. The first two picks, I gave them both C minuses. I thought they were both reaches. Jack Campbell was my number 4 linebacker, and Jahmyr Gibbs was my number 3 running back. I do not like the idea of taking a running back inside the top 20. I'm fine if you're a playoff team and it's kind of the last piece to your offense. But the Lions were not in that position. They weren't a playoff team last year. As much as they ended the season really well, they did not make the playoffs, even though they probably should have, and they had much more pressing needs to address than running back and linebacker. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Alex Anzalone might be the worst starting linebacker in the NFL, and I did not want him to be re-signed. But when you're paying a linebacker 3 years, $18 million a year, he's going to start, especially with the contract worked out so that you can't get rid of him really until his last year of his contract. So you're stuck with him for 2 years. And they play the same position. Jack Campbell is not going to play weak side. Maybe he'll get on the field in some sub packages where it's obviously going to be a run play, but he's not going to usurp Alex Anzalone as the Mike linebacker in all likelihood because of the amount of money that he's getting paid. Alex Anzalone can't play the Sam. He sure as shit can't play the Will, and neither can Jack Campbell. Jahmyr Gibbs, it's whatever. I don't care. I don't like the philosophy. The fact of the matter is that you could have drafted my running back 2, Devon Achane, in the 3rd round and gotten probably better production than what Jahmyr Gibbs is going to give you this year. Because make no mistake about it, that running back that you paid in free agency, which is never a good idea, is going to get the majority of the carries. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a rotational back. David Montgomery is probably going to be the bell cow. Now, I didn't like day 1 very much, but day 2 was a lot better for 3 out of the 4 picks. Sam Laporta, that was a pick at value. I had him graded ahead of Michael Mayer. He was my number 3 tight end. My number 2 was Darnell Washington. I would have rather had him, but he had the medical concerns, so he fell in the draft. I don't blame them on passing for him. If I had access to the kind of medical information that they had access to, Darnell Washington probably wouldn't have been my tight end too. I'm perfectly fine with Sam Laporta. I think he's going to be a very good tight end in the NFL for a very long time. Brian Branch was a top 20 player on my board. I see a lot of people trying to do this with Brian Branch and like Hendon Hooker and trying to rearrange the draft and then just be like, oh, well, if you rearrange it all, then it's good. No, that's not how life works. You get graded based on the pick that you made at the time, and the negative of reaching on a running back at 12 outweighs the benefit of taking a top 20 player at 45, especially because Brian Branch, even though I value the slot position a lot, I think it might be the 3rd most important position on defense behind outside corner and edge rusher. But the NFL clearly does not value that position, so he was probably going to be there anyway. I really do like Brian Branch. He will replace Gardner Johnson after this year. I do not see a scenario where he's retained unless he wants to probably get paid around $12 million a year, which I doubt that he does. Hendon Hooker at 68. I like Hendon Hooker a lot. I think Hendon Hooker's ceiling is higher than Jared Goff's at this point. Hendon Hooker, I believed if he was healthy and could have gone through the offseason process, would have been a late 1st-round pick. I think he would have gone above Will Levis. He isn't healthy, though, and he went 68. I had him as top 40 grades. This is good value. It's an A-minus pick. Then you made the worst pick of the draft at pick 96. I've graded every draft just to do that for fun, but this was the worst pick of the draft. Broderick Martin is a 6'4", 6'5", 330, 340-pound defensive tackle with no pass rush upside who consistently allowed group of 5 offensive linemen to gain leverage and move him in the run game. This was an undraftable prospect who was a camp cut in my mind. Not only that, but the Lions also already have 2 quality nose tackles on their roster in Liam McNeil, who was one of the better nose tackles in the NFL, and Benito Jones, who is a good rotational kind of one down defensive lineman. Best case scenario, Brock Martin is that, but worse. Colby Sorsdahl, this is just a reach. I didn't actually have a grade on him on the draft. After watching film on him, he probably would have been a priority UDFA for me, but it's not that big of a deal if you take a guy that you really like in the 5th round when I had him graded 2 rounds below that. It doesn't matter all that much, but it is below value in my opinion, so I gave it a C-. Antoine Green, I actually had a 5th round grade on. I do like Antoine Green. He's probably not going to make the roster just because the Lions wide receiver depth is pretty good, but I still like him as a future piece because the Lions are going to be losing 3 wide receivers after this year. So I like it as a pick for next year to potentially be a 4th or 3rd wide receiver. Overall, I'd give it a C minus probably. I don't believe they got like par value out of their picks. I think they hit over par in my mind. Moving on to the quarterbacks, this is my prediction. Obviously, Jared Goff is going to be QB1. I believe when it's all said and done and Hendon Hooker is healthy, he will actually be the backup quarterback. I think Nate Sudfeld will be probably a practice squad player who will be that emergency 3rd quarterback if needed. And Adrian Martinez has the chance to be a practice squad quarterback as well. Probably not with the Lions. Those 3 QBs right there are, I think, as close to roster locks as you're going to get for 3 players. Goff, I do think he's going to regress slightly. Like, I don't think he's going to go the entire second half of the year without throwing an interception. I do think the offense is going to be just as good, if not a little bit better, but I think the running game is going to go from below average to borderline elite with the addition of David Montgomery, who I think, given the proper opportunity, has the chance to be a top 5 running back in football. Also, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be productive as well, even though I did just spend a couple of minutes talking about how I didn't like the pick. Doesn't mean I don't like the player. It just means I would have preferred to have drafted him in the 3rd round. Speaking of running backs, I fully expect David Montgomery to be the starter and Jahmyr Gibbs to be the backup, with Craig Reynolds, because of special teams value, ending up as running back 3. Mohamed Ibrahim has the best chance of supplanting Craig Reynolds as RB3 or becoming an RB4. I think he's better than Jamar Jefferson, and to be entirely honest with you, I think he's better running the football than Craig Reynolds, but I don't think he has a whole lot of special teams upside, so that's why Craig Reynolds is going to make the roster ahead of him, in my opinion. Overall, this is a pretty solid group. David Montgomery, like I said just a second ago, I think behind this offensive line, he could be a top 5 running back in football. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a very effective change of pace guy. He'll probably get more touches in the passing game early on in the year than he will in the running game, but if David Montgomery, God forbid, ended up getting injured, maybe it's just like a hamstring tweak, so he's out for 2, 3, 4 weeks, Jahmyr Gibbs could potentially come in and pick up the slack pretty well. Tight ends, I still think it's probably Brock Wright at the beginning of the year being sort of the Y tight ends, and Sam Laporta coming in on passing downs, BDH. Shane Zylstra is very likely to be the tight end 3. Could keep 4 tight ends. The Lions do love tight ends, so that could be James Mitchell as the 4th tight end. I think he's more likely to be a practice squad candidate in my mind. Shane Zylstra is somebody as tight end 3 that I'm pretty happy with that, because he's a very effective blocker, and at times he has flashed in the passing game, especially in the red zone. But Sam Laporta is the future of this position. In case you're wondering, I had him graded higher than TJ Hawkinson when TJ Hawkinson came out, but I also think that he has way more upside than TJ Hawkinson because he's a way better athlete and way faster. But I think, like TJ Hawkinson, his running game abilities in terms of blocking is a little bit overrated. Brock Wright is a good all-around tight end, and I think he'll probably start the year as tight end 1 and end the year as tight end 2. Wide receivers, this is a good group, a lot of depth. Wide receiver 1 is obviously going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. Wide receiver 2, when he's finished being suspended, is going to be Jameson Williams. Josh Reynolds is likely to be the wide receiver 3, with Khalif Raymond at wide receiver 4, and Marvin Jones sort of being a specialist who's on the field for sub packages that is likely to be the 5 during the season. I think they could keep 6 wide receivers, especially with Antoine Green or Maurice Alexander, because of the special teams value. Early on in the year, one of those 2 guys will probably make the roster outright. If I had to guess, it would probably be Alexander because of the return ability. Raymond is going to be the punt returner, Alexander likely the kick returner. But Antoine Green is somebody that I like, and I think he might be somebody who's too good to risk putting him on the practice squad. Khalif Raymond is a productive wide receiver 4. He might legitimately be the best 4th wide receiver in the NFL. Josh Reynolds is a quality, maybe slightly below average wide receiver 3. Jamison Williams has the chance to be elite. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a legitimate Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. This is a very, very good group for Jared Goff to throw the ball to. Offensive line. We kind of know how it's going to play out. It's going to be Decker, Jackson, Ragnow, Vaitai, and Sewell as the starting guys, with Graham as sort of the 6th man and Affetti as the swing tackle. However, my prediction is that the 7th offensive lineman, again, you could end up keeping more, but I think Graham Glasgow saves you a roster spot, being able to play either guard spot or a center. Al-Shika actually did an admirable job filling in as a guard, in my opinion, before I believe he ended up getting hurt last year. So he's probably my runner right now to be that guy. Could be Matt Nelson or somebody else, but when we look at the practice squad potential candidates, I think Ross Pierschbacher, Colby Sorsdahl, and Obinna Eze is likely to be those 3 sort of practice squad offensive linemen. Eze has a lot of potential. Sorsdahl is somebody who in 2 or 3 years I could potentially see starting as a guard, and Pierschbacher just seems like somebody who will make the roster. Moving on to the interior of the defensive line, this is how I believe it is going to work out. At the 1 technique or the nose tackle position, you're going to have a Liam McNeil. Obviously, he's probably your best interior guy, and you're going to have Isaiah Buggs as the 3 tech, who played admirably last year, quality player, not someone who should be starting in my opinion, but he's going to because he's the best option that we have currently. As far as the 1 tackle rotation, Brock Martin, as much as I just don't think he's going to work out, he's going to make the roster, and Benito Jones is going to be the other guy that's going to make the rotation. As far as the 3 technique, we really only have Levi Onwuzurike and Chris Smith as far as people that could potentially rotate in on the at that position. Liam McNeil, maybe in obvious run situations, could get bumped to the 3 technique, but we'll be seeing a lot of Isaiah Buggs this year, as we can't really count on Onwuzurike. And in obvious pass rushing situations, we probably won't see either McNeil, Buggs, or any of the other defensive tackles on the field anyway, because the Lions' edge depth is very good. I think the starters will probably end up being Aiden Hutchinson and John Kaminsky, with Kaminsky being one of the guys that is going to kick inside during obvious pass rush situations, and I think Romeo Okwara and Charles Harris will be the first 2 off the bench, with Josh Pascal kind of being a rotational guy, 5 to 12 snaps a game, some of which is going to come on the inside. Early on in the year, I do like Josh Pascal a lot. I think he has high-end starter upside in the NFL and could potentially be a difference maker rushing on the inside. As far as practice squad candidates, Zach Morton and Chris Smith, who's a bit of a tweener and could fit into either category, are probably the only guys that I can see right now being on the practice squad. Linebackers, at the mic, it's going to be Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, and Derek Barnes. I think all 3 of them will make the roster. Derek Barnes has become a special teams staple, and also has started camp off really well from what I understand. Unlike Jack Campbell, I think he could find his way working at the SAM in more obvious run situations than someone like a Julian Okwara or a James Houston. At the will, it's most likely going to be Malcolm Rodriguez with Jalen Reeves-Maybin backing him up. I could see Jalen Reeves-Maybin get on the field in the rotation, but he's really here because of the special teams value. He's one of the best special teams players in the NFL. At the SAM, I fully expect it to be James Houston at the start of the year, with him maybe kicking down to an edge position on pass rushing situations, and Julian Okwara as more of a all-around linebacker type of guy. I think he can rush the passer a little bit, but he can also stay in coverage a little bit. He's not great at either. He's probably below average at both, but another quality special teams player and somebody who I think makes the roster. Same could go with Anthony Pittman. DBs, this is the strength of the defense. There are a ton of guys that I like here. Cam Sutton is a quality cornerback too. Emmanuel Mosley is a lower end cornerback too. Kirby Joseph has the chance to be an elite safety. Tracy Walker is very, very good, especially in a quarters or cover 3 situation, potentially cover 2. We could see more cover 2 this year because the Lions do have 2 legitimate safeties with range and potentially a linebacker in Jack Campbell who could carry the seam a little bit. And you've got C.J. Gardner-Johnson in the slot, who is one of the best slot corners in the NFL. Last year, he proved that he was elite at the back safety position as well as being very, very good in the slot. I actually thought he was better as a back safety than in the slot, but he's going to start off in the slot. And if Kirby Joseph or Tracy Walker, God forbid, end up getting hurt, then Gardner-Johnson will likely kick back there and Brian Branch will come in as the slot corner. As the depth goes, we have the aforementioned Brian Branch, Jerry Jacobs, Savion Smith, and Will Harris. Those are the guys that I think are going to make the roster outright. However, they got 2 UDFAs that I actually like quite a bit in Starling Thomas and Stephen Gilmore out of University of Alabama, Birmingham, and Marshall, respectively. Chase Lucas is sort of the last guy. I do think he still has some upside as a nickel corner or a slot type of guy, but with the drafting of Brian Branch, I'm not sure his future is with the Lions. Overall, when we're ranking them in the division, I've got the quarterback as the number 2 position, but really that's the only one where you're just looking at the starter and not really the depth. I do think Kirk Cousins is better than Jared Goff. I think they're very close. I think they're both bottom of tier 2 of quarterbacks, but I would say Kirk Cousins is better. Running back room, I think it's number 1. This was a little bit of a debate back when the Vikings still had Dalvin Cook. I honestly probably would have put them number 1 and you number 2, but they cut Dalvin Cook, so you're up to number 1. Bears running back room isn't great, and Green Bay I think is a little bit overrated. I think Aaron Jones is a little bit overrated. I think A.J. Dillon is actually better than Aaron Jones, but I think David Montgomery is better than A.J. Dillon, and Jahmyr Gibbs is a little bit of a wild card, but I do think he's going to be productive. Tight end, 3 out of 4 right now. I just like Bears tight ends a little bit more. They're a little bit more proven. By the end of this year, this could be number 2. You're not getting past the Vikings with T.J. Hockenson, who's a legitimate Pro Bowl caliber tight end, and Josh Oliver, who is the best second tight end in the NFL and would probably start on 2/3 of the league. Wide receiver, I got you at 2 out of 4. I just couldn't put you ahead of the Vikings with Justin Jefferson, even though I do think you have better depth. But you could potentially have a better wide receiver too than them. I think Jordan Addison is going to be very good and very productive for them this year even. But Jameson Williams is going to miss 6 weeks, so I'm giving the edge right now to the Vikings. But that very, very easily could be number 1 by the end of the season. Offensive line, I did put you at 1. This was really tough between you and the Vikings because you look at the left tackle position, Christian Darrisaw is better than Taylor Decker. It's not even a conversation. Christian Darrisaw is probably a top 6 left tackle in the NFL, and Taylor Decker is maybe slightly above average to good. And then you look at left guard, I think it's Ezra Cleveland and Jonah Jackson. I would say they're both borderline Pro Bowl caliber, so that's a bit of a wash. Frank Ragnow is better than Garrett Bradbury. You look at right guard, I think Vaitai is better than Ed Ingram. And you look at right tackle, like we're probably honestly talking about right tackle 2 and right tackle 3 in the NFL behind Tristan Wirfs. Or actually, I forgot about Lane Johnson. So we're probably talking about 3 and 4 in the entire NFL between Sewell and O'Neal. So I'm going to call that a wash, but you win the interior, all three interior positions. So I gave the edge to the Lions on the offensive line. The D line, I grouped the interior and the exterior on the defensive lines together just because they're a unit. I wanted to look at them individually in this order, but as together, they are a unit. So all together, this is probably the worst in the division. The Bears have a really, really good interior. Their edge group is horrible, but their interior group is the best in the division. The Vikings are solid to quality along the defensive line, and with Rashawn Gary coming back, the Packers are going to be excellent. Linebacker, this is also the worst in the position. It's probably a bottom 10 unit in the NFL unless Jack Campbell comes out and has a Luke Kuechly type of rookie year, which, I mean, it's not impossible, but I think it's unlikely. Malcolm Rodriguez, we talk about, he played well, but he was last year a below average linebacker in the NFL. I hope he can get better. I hope he can improve, but it was what it was last year. And the Sam position with James Houston, I'm just not sure how that's actually going to work out. James Houston had, I think, 6 sacks in his first 4 games and then had 1.5 in his last 3 because he did kind of get figured out a little bit. He was really not a one-trick pony, but a 2-trick pony, and he didn't have any counter moves. He won with his absurd bendiness, and he's very explosive. If he can get some counter moves and add a 3rd or 4th move, it's kind of like a pitcher. When he comes out of high school, he's got a fastball and a slider, but he needs to learn the curve and the changeup in order to really be elite and to make it to the major league level. That's kind of the same way that I feel about James Houston. But right now, that's the worst group in the division. However, I do think you have the best secondary in the division. You might have the best. There's no might about it. You have the best safety group in the NFL. In terms of depth, in terms of quality of player, Kirby Joseph could be elite. Garner Johnson is elite. Tracy Walker is borderline Pro Bowl caliber. And Brian Branch is going to be, during his prime, one of the best slot defenders in the NFL. Your corners are average to maybe just a little bit below average, but the safety group carries you in what is actually a pretty weak division in terms of secondary. To finish off this video, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the season. Week 1 with the Chiefs. Week 2, home versus Seattle. Home versus the Falcons. At the Packers. Home versus the Panthers. At the Bucks, at the Ravens versus the Raiders. Bye week, then the Chargers, the Bears, Packers, Saints, Bears again, Denver, Vikings, Cowboys, Vikings. Right here on the screen, these are the what I would call gimmies, which is I think you're going to lose these games like at least 7 out of 10 times, and I think you're going to win these games at least 7 out of 10 times. That being, I think you're going to lose to the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Vikings once, and the Cowboys. And then I think you're going to beat the Vikings, Denver, the Packers twice, or the Packers at home, and the Bears at home, along with the Falcons and the Buccaneers, who I think are both going to be bad this year. But this is the full prediction. I've got you as 0-1, then against the Chiefs. I'm going to beat you Seattle because I want to beat Seattle. I want you to beat Seattle. The Falcons, that's a W. The Packers in Green Bay. I think early on in the season, Jordan Love is still kind of going to be figuring it out. Also, I just don't buy into the talent of that team a whole lot. They might have the worst overall talented roster right now in the division because I actually like the Bears roster quite a bit. Panthers with a rookie quarterback, not a great receiving core or an offensive line. I think that's one where you kind of sweat a little bit, but you pull out the W. The Buccaneers are going to be awful. They have Baker Mayfield as their quarterback. They're not going to win more than 4 games. The Ravens, I think, are legitimately going to compete for the Super Bowl this year, which is probably the first time I can say that under Lamar Jackson. The Raiders are going to be better than people think they're going to be, but they do have a pretty tough schedule, so they're probably going to end up right where you think they're going to end up. And I got you winning that game. Then you go into the bye, you get an extra week to prepare, but I don't think it matters. I think the Chargers have one of the best rosters in the NFL, and I think you're gonna take the L there. The Bears, Packers, same sort of deal. I just don't think they have what it takes talent-wise to beat you, although Justin Fields could go Superman like he did in the game this year, the first game this year in Chicago, and potentially carry that team to victory. Green Bay, maybe Jordan Love has kind of figured it out by then, but I just in general don't buy into Jordan Love very much. They don't really have a whole lot of weapons. I love Jaden Reed, who they took in the draft out of Michigan State, but Watson and Dubs both have their own question marks, so I think you'd be able to match up well and sweep them. The Saints is the next one. This is the one where I was the least confident in picking it either way, because on paper the Saints have a better roster than you do, but where it matters, I think you match up well against them. Your defensive line is bad, well, that's fine. The Saints aren't built to run the football, so your secondary is really good and they want to throw the ball. They're going to want to throw the ball, so it's going to end up working out where you match up on defense really well with them, and on offense their weakness is the secondary and their strength is the front seven. Well, your strength is your offensive line and your wide receivers, so I think you match up well against the Saints. I think that's a W. At the Bears, I just think the Bears are going to pull one out. I don't think you're going to end up 5-1 in the division. I thought 4-2 was the most realistic option, and I think the Bears at home later on in the season, maybe Eberflus coach for his job a little bit, trying to get the W, and I think they do. Denver week 15, I think that's a W. I think that team missed their Super Bowl window. I think after this year, they're damn near going to blow it up and commit to a 3 or 4 year long rebuild with Sean Payton, and I think this might be the game that ends them. At the Vikings, Minnesota, I think, got worse this offseason. I do think this team is going to be motivated to play and beat Minnesota in Minneapolis this year, but I think a split is the most likely outcome with the Vikings. Then Dallas, week 17, I think that's a loss. It's really close. That's a really close one. That's probably the one that I had the second most trouble with outside of the Saints. But I think you probably split those two games because those are two playoff caliber teams. The Vikings, week 18, I think you finish off the year with a W in what is likely, or what maybe not likely, but could potentially decide the division. I do think you're going to win the division. I have you going 11-6. I think that is good enough to get the job done for the first time since 1991 and the second time in the history of the NFL. And that is all that I have for today. Like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and leave a comment down below if you disagreed with me at any point in the video. But let's keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole. And I'll see you next time.